Hi, my name is Relevo and this is the third part of my Baldur's Gate 3 Beginner's Guide series. In this video, I shall teach you about the action economy, spellcasting, and resting. These topics are timestamped in the timeline down below. Action economy is the concept of how much resources your team has versus that of the enemy per round. These resources are actions, bonus actions, reactions, and movement. These resources was the main topic of my previous video, which focuses on martial combat. If you want to check it out, click the eye in the top right corner or check the link down below. In every combat encounter, the first thing you should look at is the action economy. The bigger the gap in the action economy, the easier it is for the favored team. For example, a 4-character party, which is the standard of Baldur's Gate 3, will have a harder time defeating 10 goblins than a single hobgoblin. #playable hobgoblins. A good rule of thumb in handling the action economy is removing one enemy is better than damaging every enemy. Another tool in your arsenal of managing the action economy are special actions. Special actions are granted by your class, race, or feats that modifies your resource usage, such as using no resource like action surge of a fighter, using a new resource like a sorcerer's font of sorcery points, changing the resource used like a cunning action of a rogue, or improving the resource used like augmenting an attack with the divine smite of a paladin. These augment on attack are actually changed from 5e to Baldur's Gate 3. Back in 5e, you only augment an attack after you hit, but now it is changed that you have to declare that you are using an augmenting attack before you attack, such as Lizelle, a battle master, using a pushing attack, such as here. Don't worry, you still don't use resources if you miss. But there will be no more crit fishing with this type of augmenting attack. Crit fishing, if you do not know, was a 5e thing or a tabletop thing where you only use this divine smites and any other augmenting attack on a crit because it also gets doubled. You can still do that in Baldur's Gate 3 by save scumming if that's your thing. Okay, now onto spellcasting. Spellcasting works differently from other video games that uses a pool of resource such as mana. In Baldur's Gate 3, you need a quote-unquote castable spell and a spell slot, with the exception of cantrips, which are also known as level 0 spells. This does not need a spell slot to be casted. Leveled spells, on the other hand, need a spell slot of the appropriate level or higher. To put it simply, think of a spell like a gun. You need a bullet of the appropriate size for it to be able to shoot it. For example, a fireball, a level 3 spell, needs a 3rd level spell slot or higher to cast it. Yes, or higher. This is called upcasting. If you are using a higher level spell slot than the spell needs. For example, again, fireball, a 3rd level spell. If you use a 4th level spell slot instead of 8d6 fire damage, it will become a 9d6 fire damage. If you have no idea what those numbers mean, I suggest you check out the first video, which we talked about dice. Caveat, a word of warning for everyone, not all spells benefit from upcasting, but most damaging spells do. Also, there is a rule of you cannot cast 2 level spell per turn, with the exception of reactionary spells. But in a playthrough of Sven in a D&D live show, he casted 2 spells per turn. I do not know if that was a change, but they never talked about it, so I think that is just an oversight. Alright, that's basically the basics of it. But I said quote-unquote castable spell. How do you actually get a castable spell? Now, I will talk about the spell funnel, which is how a spell become a castable spell for you or your character. The spell funnel looks like this. Spell level, spell list and expanded spell list, spells known, spells prepared. That is the spell funnel. Let's first talk about the spell level. The spell level is the access you have for spells. To calculate which spell level you have access to is this. It's half your class level rounded up. So if you're a level 1 wizard, you have access to level 1 spells. If you are a level 2 wizard, you still have access to only first level spells. But if you're a level 3 wizard, you now have access to second level spells. So no, in early access, we are not gonna cast Fireball. Next up, spell list and expanded spell list. Spell list is what the name suggests. It's a list of spells. Every caster class and hybrid class have their own spell list. These list of spells are the only spells that the classes can learn. A warlock can only learn from warlock spell list, a cleric only from the cleric spell list, and so on and so forth. But there is also something called an expanded spell list. An expanded spell list does what its name suggests. It expands the spell list of a class. It adds spells that is not normally in the base spell list. For example, a warlock does not have access to Fireball. But if your warlock has an otherworldly patron of a fiend, the expanded spell list of a fiend includes Fireball. So they can learn Fireball given they have the appropriate level. Next up in the spell funnel is spells known. Spells known are what spells you actually know. This comes from typically leveling up. You pick from your spell list that you want to be spells known. There are special exceptions, but we are gonna go discuss that when we discuss the type of spellcasters later. Up next is spells prepared. Spells prepared is you preparing that spell for the day from the spells known, which was from your spell list. This is how you make your spells known into a castable spell. You can only do this every long rests. So that's how the spell funnels work. You gain access to the spell level, you pick from your spell list, you pick from your spells known, and you cast from your spells prepared. That's why I call it the funnel. Now, I'm gonna talk about the type of spellcasters that bypass the spell funnel, because everyone does in some way or form. The types of spellcasters: divine and nature, innate, pact, and learned. First are divine and nature, which is the cleric, paladins, and druids. The divine or nature divine spellcasters bypasses spells known because they do not need to know it. They just need to prepare it. So basically, they have access to every spell on their spell list or expanded spell list if they have an expanded spell list. Their gods or nature gives them spells. So a cleric, whatever cleric you are, you have access to all spells on the cleric spell list. But you still have to prepare them. That's how divines work. They bypass spells known. Up next is innate, like sorcerers and bard. The innate spellcasters bypass spells prepared. They do not need to prepare their spells because it's in their blood. They can just cast it. So every spells known by the innate spellcaster is castable. The next one is pact magic. These are the warlocks. Warlocks does not need to prepare spells as well, but they have limited spell slots. Very, very limited spell slots. Their spell slots are also always maxed. So a level 3 warlock will always have second level spell slots that they can recover faster than most spellcasters. And the last but not the least of the type of spellcasters are the learned ones, which is a wizard. A wizard does not bypass any stage of the spell funnel. They have to go through all of that. But as a wizard, you can learn spells out in the wild rather than just leveling. So your spells known are more flexible because it does not require you to level up to learn a spell because of your spell book. Those are wizards. That's it. Those are the type of spellcasters. They have more nuance to them, but yeah, those are the basic things that differentiate them from each other. And that's where I'm gonna leave that. I will leave the nuance of these spellcasters on my guides for them. Now let's talk about the spells themselves. Every spell has a property, and we're gonna talk about these properties. These properties are their levels, which we already know, their range, their targeting, their casting time, their saving throws, if it's concentration, their duration, their damage type, the schools of magic, and also components. First, let's talk about range. Range, it's pretty self-explanatory. Melee is you have to be adjacent to the enemy to be able to do it. Range, you need to be about 30 feet, which also gives you disadvantage if you're melee, just like any range attack. This ranges from 30 feet, 60 feet, 120 feet, and even 300 feet. But sometimes you don't need line of sight, sometimes you do. So that's the difference between range attacks of bows and crossbows and spells, because sometimes you don't need a line of sight to your target. Speaking of targets, it can be either targeted or an AoE. First, let's talk about targeted. It can be a single target or a multi-target. Most multi-targets are buffs. You can target like 3 or 2 people with bless. By the way, buffs does not stack. If it's the same buff, it does not stack. So you cannot bless 2 times. Just keep that in mind. Up next is AoE. There are different types of AoE target area. There's a line, which targets a line, a sphere, which is like a sphere or a cube or a cylinder or a cone. By the way, if it says every creature, it means it has friendly fire. Every enemy, it doesn't have friendly fire. So you need to read your spells, okay? So keep that in mind and read your damn spells. Up next is casting time. Casting time is basically what resource it uses, like action or a bonus action or a reaction. That's basically what casting time is. But there's also casting time of 1 minute or a 10-minute cast. It's probably not recommended to be casted on a combat because every round is 6 seconds. So if you cast a minute cast, you will cast it for like 10 rounds and you will not finish that. Most fights does not last 10 rounds. And also a 10-minute cast, which is a ritual, which makes you cast a ritual spell, which means it will not use a spell slot. Not every spell is a ritual. This 1 minute and ritual cast are probably gonna be out of combat skills. So that's probably how it will work, because casting it in combat is not ideal. Up next, saving throws. Before we get into all that, I will tell you about your spell modifier, which I should have told you before, but this is where it got relevant. Your spell modifier is your main stat for your casters. If a barbarian needs strength, a wizards need intelligence. That's basically it. You know what ability scores are, right? It's in the first video. Look it up. Now that we know about the spell modifiers, let's start with spell attacks. Spell attack is you rolling a d20 plus your spell modifier plus your proficiency. That's your spell attack. It's like you're making an attack versus their AC. That's it. That's like normal attack. Now, let's go to saving throws. For example, if you cast a fireball, you will make them roll a dexterity saving throw, which means they are trying to avoid your fireball. They will make a saving throw which is d20 plus their saving throw modifier, which is based on their ability score modifier. That's it. Versus your save DC. This is different from your AC. Now, let's talk about that spell save DC, which is very important for casters. Your spell save DC is this: 8 plus your spell ability modifier plus your proficiency. They need to beat that to be able to succeed on the saving throw, because if they fail, they either take full damage or they take an additional effect. So you need to have your save DC as high as possible. Now let's talk about concentration and duration, because most of them are always intertwined. Duration mostly lasts for like 1 minute, like a debuff, or a 1 round, or until the next turn, or until they have a successful save. That's what duration is. As I said, 1 minute is 10 rounds of combat. Let's talk about concentration. Concentration is you having to concentrate on a spell to keep it working. This does not mean you have to stay there like casting or it will be interrupted. No, this is you concentrating on a spell effect but you can still do any other actions. You can still cast spells when you're concentrating on a spell. You just can't concentrate on 2 spells. For example, debuffing an opponent needs concentration. Paralyzing an enemy with hold person needs concentration. But you can break concentration by casting another concentration spell, or if you get damaged. It does not break instantly. You need to make a concentration saving throw. Concentration saving throw are also known as constitution saving throws. This is you trying to avoid the effect of losing concentration. You will have to roll a d20 plus your constitution modifier. If you are proficient in concentration saving throw, then you also add your proficiency bonus. The DC of these concentration checks are mostly likely 10 or half the damage taken. If you are damaged for 18, your DC is 10. If you are damaged for 22, your DC is 11. That's how concentration works and concentration check works. Up next is the damage type. We've already discussed this on the previous video. Now the schools. The schools of magic are conjuration, abjuration, evocation, divination, enchantment, illusion, necromancy, and transmutation. This doesn't really affect most of casters, but wizards have class features on them that makes them specialize on a school of magic. There is also components. Spell components are verbal, somatic, and material. Verbal means you have to chant something, you have to talk. You cannot cast spells that has verbal components if you are silenced. The next one is somatic components. This is hand gestures, intricate Naruto shit. If your hands are tied or otherwise incapacitated, you cannot cast spells that has somatic components. Now, material components are what it says on the tin. Materials. Most DMs just hand waves this. Unless Larian wants us to collect bat shit for our fireballs, then you really don't need to worry about it, with the exception of resurrection spells or anything that has expensive material components like diamonds, diamond dust, which are components for resurrection spells like Raise Dead, Revivify, and True Resurrection. And those are the components. Resting. There's 2 different types of rest. Short rest and long rests. Short rests are a mostly 1 hour rest. You can use some of your hit dice to heal. You know what hit dice is, right? Hit dice is your HP dice, right? You know that. You've watched the first video. This can also recover some of your class features. That's about it. You can use some spells like Song of Rest if you're a bard to improve healing on your hit dice, or you can use Arcane Recovery if you're a wizard to recover some spell slots. Oh, also, if you're a pack magic or warlock, you restore all your spell slots on a short rest. Now, long rest. Long rest, we already know that we are gonna have camp interaction, and you can probably assume that's where sex will happen, or romance. Long rest typically lasts 8 hours. I don't know how they actually gonna time this. Are they gonna go hand wave the time, or they gonna go the Pathfinder way, which you will have time limits on your quests, which a lot of people does not like, but I actually liked it because it gives a sort of push. But I get why people don't like it, because they feel rushed to the story and it really dampens the exploration part of it. So yeah, I really hope they clarify that. But we're gonna have early access soon, so we can test them out. You can recover half your hit dice. You will have full recovery on your HP and your spell slots. That's resting. It's a narrative mechanic, so you can talk to people, but also a recovery mechanic. Right now, we haven't seen how short rests work. I hope the short rest mechanic gets more fleshed out, and the long rest mechanic as well. I think that's it for this video. Up next, we're gonna talk about loot, leveling, and feats. And until then, keep it real.
It's not possible. You know how to use that stone.
Oh, come on. I'm back, bitch. Ah, shit.